The next step in our module on motivation and engagement is the step which further extends our framework, our view on issues related to being motivated in education. In this step, we are going to take the context into consideration. The context of the school, the classroom, the peers, the teacher, and the task. You might consider this domain of research on engagement as a domain which has been very much inspired by the constructivist, the social constructivist perspective. So we again have this, sequence of three broadening and broadening scopes of views on, in this case, not learning but motivation in education. The issue received more and more attention at the beginning of this century, also by, let's say, concerns about increasing dropout ratios in American primary and secondary education. And people were more and more interested in finding ways to actually to motivate students to become engaged and become active in school, and in this way also become more successful in meeting the terms which have been set. Okay, the paper I have used for this particular unit is the paper by Frederiks Blumenfeld in Paris, School Engagement, Potential of the Concept, State of the Evidence. It's a review in the Review of Educational Research, so very interesting if you want to follow up on this short introduction. The concept of engagement, is more or less vaguely defined as being connected and being involved, and being active in school. So engagement is something like being motivated and also being active and connected and moved, etc., etc. And in the literature, usually there is a distinction between three kinds of engagement: behavioral engagement, emotional engagement, and cognitive engagement. So we are going to discuss these three related concepts first. And then we have a look into the outcomes of engagement, so the positive outcomes of being engaged, and also have a look into the antecedents of engagement, so what precedes and what determines engagement. Okay, first the issue of behavioral engagement. So behavioral engagement is something like being positively involved in the school, positive conduct, absence of disruptive behavior, being involved in learning and in academic tasks, but also in the social environment of the school, participating in school-related activities. So everything the ideal student shows when being active in the school, being connected, being related, contributing to the school, to the products which are let's say the focus of the school and the objectives of the school, etc., etc. So behavioral engagements does focus on this behavioral aspect, being involved in what school is about, not only the academic issues but also the social issues. So being active in the school councils, being involved in policy issues is also definitely an example of behavioral engagement in the school. Now, the second kind of engagement is emotional engagement. Here we talk about students' emotions, students' affective reactions in the classroom, students' attitudes, basically. Being interested, being bored, happy, sad, anxious in the classroom, all these emotions are part of the status of emotional engagement of the students, and the attitudes which are the basis of these emotions. Identification with the school, feeling safe and secure in the school, but also identifying with the values of the school are all part of this emotional engagement. So, as the authors of the review article emphasize, there is a lot of research on attitudes which is directly relevant here and may even be duplicated by more recent research which operates under the flag of engagement. Okay, and the third part of engagements is the cognitive engagement kind, and here we talk about self-regulation, about effort, about investment in learning, flexibility in problem solving, preference for hard work, positive coping in the face of failure, so being able to self-regulate also in a situation where you're not successful, and striving for mastery goals and performance goals. I already mentioned that earlier, this distinction between mastery goals and performance goals. So mastery goals are, let's say, the goals to be competent, to be, let's say, engaged in the subject matter area, to simply study for the fun of studying, being interested in the domain in which you are working, etc. So these are all mastery goals. So if you want to know more about a particular subject, the dinos or whatever you can think of, then you try to attain mastery goals. Performance goals are, so these are definitely intrinsically motivated goals. Performance goals may be more extrinsically motivated. You want to reach a certain level of expertise because it helps you to find your way in the professional life, for instance, to start your career, or it's a necessary entrance qualification you need to start with a further study or whatever. So then the goals are not intrinsic but extrinsic. You want to show off, and that's what we call the performance goal, or the performance goal orientation. And people, as I already mentioned, tend to think that mastery goals and a mastery goal orientation is preferable over a performance goal orientation. That is true to a certain extent, as Paul Pintrich has been explaining, because within this performance goal orientation attitude, there is a distinction between, let's say, people who want simply to approach a particular goal and do everything to reach the goal. So that's the approach performance orientation. But there is also the kind of orientation which is called avoidance performance orientation. And this kind of orientation is a characteristic of people who want to avoid failure, who want to cope with all kinds of problems they fear and they expect, and are motivated to act because of this coping, way of doing working in school, which is not very beneficial to arriving at your to learn, basically arriving at academic standards. So therefore, the approach kind of performance orientation is really can be very helpful. The avoidance kind is in fact detrimental to academic success. So these two orientations are important. I mean, the difference between mastery and performance is important. And then the next step, the difference between approach performance and avoidance performance is a very relevant and important. Okay, so this is all about the cognitive engagement part of the engagement concept, so to speak. Now, let's try to have a look at outcomes of engagement. What does the engaged student accomplish, basically? Of course, academic achievement. That's the first thing you think of. Being active in school, being emotionally attached in a positive way, and being cognitively engaged, deploying strategies which help you to succeed, are all good preconditions for arriving at your goals, at academic successes. But there's the other side of the coin, of course. I already mentioned that in the introduction. that dropout issues are or were and are still a problem which has to be faced. So then we do not talk about engagement, but about disengagement. And the important and very relevant thing here is the observation that dropping out is preceded by behavioral disengagement. So less activity in the school, less efforts to be invested in academic or social goals within the school environment, less identification with the school environment. These signs of behavioral and perhaps emotional and cognitive disengagement have to be taken very seriously, because they signal that dropping out may follow, and perhaps even worse problems. So therefore, this disengagement problem or the phenomenon is a very important, let's say, sign to be taken very seriously. Okay. Then some comments on antecedents of engagement, and then we have a look at the school level. So what does the school do to help students to be engaged? What does the classroom do to help students to be engaged or disengaged? What do the peers do, and what does the task do? And the classroom is, of course, the teacher as well as the classroom conditions. So first, the school. Now, you can imagine that some schools are more successful in engaging students, in helping students to be really connected to the academic and social goals of the school, more successful than other schools. And the research in this area has identified a few very important factors. Voluntary choice, so the ability for students to choose their career within the school environment is definitely a predictor of engagement. Clear and consistent goals within the school are also a very important, let's say, conditions for developing engaged students. A relatively small size of the classroom is, of course, also very helpful. The ability or the opportunity students receive to become active participants in policy management issues, a clear cooperation between staff and students, and a product-oriented academic work, which more or less says that students are active, learning things, trying to understand things, but when they do so in the context of producing something, then they are more engaged. For instance, we have seen examples of communities of learners in which students do research in order to solve a particular problem or contribute to the solution of a problem. Well, this is definitely an example of such a product-oriented academic environment, which does, in fact, stimulate students to be engaged in reaching the goals which have been set. Okay, I would like to show you one example of such an environment which does indeed contribute to engagement among the students. It is called school-wide positive behavior support. It is really a strategy which can be adopted by schools and which helps them to strengthen and further this engagement. You can find more information on this particular website I have identified here. I just give you a few examples. There is also in the Netherlands a strong movement which in fact further develops the issue of school-wide positive behavior support. There has been done a lot of research also in the European context, and it's interesting to further explore this domain, because it may help you when you are in a situation, and engagement is one of the issues of your study. What does a school do which is following, this strategy of school-wide positive behavior support? First of all, there is a sort of, basic involvement of all students in the development of social skills. So students are trained in social skills actively, and staff is also trained in creating a positive social climate and respond and is trained to respond to problem behavior in a consistent way. So there is a lot of effort being invested in staff development and in the development of the students as well. And that's a sort of primary prevention strategy, directed towards prevention of disengagement, in which all students are involved and all teachers are involved. That's the first level or the first tier. The second tier is as what is called, has been called secondary prevention, and there particular groups of students are identified: students at risk for social of academic problems, or students who did not respond to the universal social skills training and receive additional support. There are group interventions and there is individual support at this second tier, second level of prevention of disengagement. And, well, of course, there is a more specific focus on particular social or psychological issues which have to be addressed. So there is some specification here. It's not one size fits all at this level. It is focused on particular students and on particular problems. Okay, and then the second level is a further specification of individual students' needs. So there is a really tailored, support for individual students. Of course, based on assessment and on team-based planning. And these interventions, this support is multi-component. So there are various issues addressed simultaneously, not only the student's academic work, but perhaps also the social environment of the student, the social skills of the student, perhaps the parent-child relationships, etc., etc. And they're all focused on improving quality of life and decreasing problem behavior. But these, at the tertiary level, of course, is a very intensive approach, whereas at the primary level, the approach is broad and not very intensive as far as each and every individual student and teacher is concerned. So there's a very structured approach geared towards the development of a positive climate in the school, with activities at 3 levels. Okay, so that's an example of the way in which the school may be further geared towards, supporting a positive engagement at the behavioral, the emotional, and the cognitive level. Okay, then the classroom. As I already said, the classroom is also the teacher. So here we have a focus on teacher support, both at the academic level and at the social or interpersonal level. And of course, Tinto has to be mentioned here. Tinto is a researcher who focused on higher education and who developed a series of models describing the way students can be engaged in higher education. This particular model has already also been criticized, but for this first introduction, it might be interesting to have a look at it. So the two very important concepts here are academic integration and social integration. So what everybody is contributing to is a sound academic integration of students and also a social integration. You have to keep in mind that Tinto's work has been based upon, the American university situation in which students are living on campus. So the social environment is much, let's say, more visible and also perhaps more malleable as far as the student's position and the student's engagement is concerned. So in the Netherlands, it might be more difficult to foster social integration because students do not live in one and the same place. You may be familiar with the situation of, university colleges in the Netherlands. There, in fact, students live on campus, and there you can imagine that in such an environment, it is easier to positively influence not only academic integration but also social integration. Okay, so everything can be done and should be done to let's say to bind students to the faculty or let's say the program in which they are actively working and studying. Teachers should pay attention to students, individual students. The small size, of course, is here very relevant, and they should do that in an academic way. But they can also pay notice of the students' presence and addressing the students personally, not only in academic matters but also in social matters, and that helps the student. That helps. The development of engagement among the students. You can imagine that students who feel personally addressed, have been seen by the teacher, they also feel more secure, securely attached, related, and that contributes, as we have seen in the discussion of self-determination theory, to their feelings of competence and autonomy. And together, that creates a very positive and stable situation as far as student motivation is concerned. Okay, so all kinds of issues are addressed here, but I would like to just focus on the two boxes on academic integration and social integration. Okay. Then antecedents, we were talking about antecedents of engagement and at the peer level. This is, of course, a very important level. It's briefly addressed here, but peer acceptance and rejection processes can be very influential as far as student engagement is concerned. So they need a proper attention, especially when bullying is taking place in primary education, for instance, and students are not included in the social environment, but excluded basically on all kinds of obscure reasons. Disengagement in minority groups is, of course, an issue to be addressed seriously because it may be the precursor of dropout, as we already have discussed, and maybe the precursor of other and more serious problems. So when we are able, as a school, to engage all students within the school environment, then we might, in fact, provide a very positive contribution to the social climate at large. So that's an important issue to discuss, I think. Okay, and then at task level, of course, we have a lot of characteristics which make academic tasks more engaging, more thrilling, and more challenging for students. And these characteristics have to do with the authenticity of the task, ownership, collaboration, diversity of talent, and of course fun. And these individual characteristics have been described in the review paper by Fredericks, but again, I think the example of the community of learners is in fact helpful here, because in such an environment, a lot of attention is being paid to providing the conditions for the development of authenticity as far as the problems are concerned. Ownership by taking students seriously in the process of doing research and knowledge production. Collaboration within, of course, a team. Diversity of talents within the team, in which students adopt, roles which do in fact reflect their talents and their possibilities, their contribution, and fun, which is of course a very important factor in developing engagement in an academic environment. Okay, so the issue of engagement is perhaps is broader. It takes into account the school environment, the influence of teachers, of peers, of the task, as we have been discussing. It makes a distinction between the various components of engagement, behavioral, emotional, and cognitive, and in that respect, it's a very rich concept. But it is also a vague concept, of course, and we have to further develop our understanding of engagement in order to be able to create a positive atmosphere in school and in order to be able to prevent the very negative consequences of disengagement.